Going to start off with this picture today. What you're looking at is an ethnic neighborhood, and I'm going to explain what an ethnic neighborhood is in just a second. You can see from the picture, lots of people, city setting, lots of stuff going on the streets. Looks like there's buying and selling of goods. So our first topic is ethnic neighborhoods. Before we get to that, let's talk about this word assimilate. Assimilate or assimilation is the process of becoming part of another culture. This is something that immigrants, they didn't need to do this. Some chose to do it, some didn't, but they're coming in from a foreign country and they have to somewhat adjust to American culture. Despite many wanting to assimilate, new immigrants often chose to live in ethnic neighborhoods. An ethnic neighborhood, by definition, is an area of a city where people of similar backgrounds live and work. It's more of a neighborhood within a city. For instance, thousands and thousands of Italians came over from Europe and they settled in New York City. They all tended to flock to one part of town where the other Italians lived. It was called Little Italy. And I think this is somewhat natural for immigrants to do because it feels more like home. How would you know if you were in an ethnic neighborhood? I think it would be pretty obvious if we could time machine you into one, because it would seem a lot like Italy to a certain extent. On the streets, you would see Italian being spoken. They might dress like they did in their native country. Signs in newspapers would be in Italian. The food at the restaurants, the markets would be Italian. Customs and holidays, you would see a Catholic church in the neighborhood. So within these big cities, especially like New York, there would be an Italian neighborhood, an Irish neighborhood, a Jewish neighborhood, and immigrants flocked to these to feel comfortable and to kind of feel like they were at home. Do they still exist today? Yes, they do. Best example would be Chinatown. This is Chinatown, I believe, in San Francisco. But your big cities, your Los Angeles, your Chicago, your New York, they still have a lot of ethnic neighborhoods that attract immigrants to live there. We're going to transition into living conditions. One of the first things immigrants have to do is they have to find a place to live. And these would be within the ethnic neighborhoods, but they're going to end up in what were known as tenements. And this is a picture of a tenement building. When we look at it today, we'd say that looks like a bunch of apartments. But tenements were a little bit different than what we think of as apartments. These were buildings that were divided into many tiny rooms. And again, you might be thinking, well, that sounds like an apartment. My example that I can give you is, if I said I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, what that means today is it has 2 bedrooms, then it has a separate bathroom, a kitchen, and probably a living area. When we say you lived in a 1-room tenement back then, it literally was 1 room. It was your living room. It was your kitchen. It's where you slept. Most likely you didn't have a bathroom in your tenement. Okay, if you were lucky, you probably had a bathroom on your floor that you shared with everyone else. So tenements led to all sorts of problems. I put this quote up here. You got to remember these buildings didn't have heating. They didn't have air conditioning. A lot of them didn't have windows if you were kind of in an internal room. So the big issue was disease. Disease spread rapidly throughout these different buildings in the big cities. And they came in different shapes and sizes. Some look better or worse than others, but you quickly get the idea of what a lot of immigrants, the conditions they were living in. Even this one looks, I think, relatively better than the other ones, but I count, it's a family of 2, 3, 4, a family of 7. Okay, but this is their whole tenement building. This is where they live. This is where they sleep, they hang out, they take their meals here. I guess the best correlation we could make today is if you invite your entire family into your bedroom and that's where you're going to spend the weekend and no one really gets to leave. Immigrants, most of them were coming over for jobs. So we're going to look at some of the common jobs in just a second. Today it's changed a lot. I would say from a quick Google search, these are some of the most common immigrant jobs today. We'll see if they remain the same. But immigrant jobs, typically immigrants were taking the jobs native-born Americans didn't want. A native-born American is someone that was born in the U.S. Is this still true today? I would probably argue in a lot of cases it is still true today to a certain extent. Anyway, back then, common jobs, factories, especially textiles in New York City. Those would be clothing. The stockyards. If you're not familiar with a stockyard is a place where animals are collected. Remember the cattle drives. They're coming up to the railroads in Kansas. From there, they would be shipped off to Kansas City, and we saw slaughterhouses. You would see coal mines. You would see steel mills. Pretty much the immigrant jobs were the lowest paying and in a lot of cases most dangerous jobs out there. A lot of these factories were called what were known as sweatshops. These are factories where people worked long hours, low pay, dangerous conditions. Your average wage back then was about 10 cents an hour. On average, people worked 60 to 70 hours a week. The only day you would really have off would probably be Sunday for most people. In addition, it was very common during this time for children as young as 8 to 10 years old to be working full time. Here's a picture. This is a fairly famous picture. This is of child coal miners. They would work in textile factories. A lot of times they would hire kids, in this case, because they could unjam the machines because they have smaller hands. Okay, why would factories hire children in the first place? Obviously, they're probably not going to be as good of a worker as an adult, but you don't have to pay them as much. They were paid typically about half. And I think this one's kind of obvious. Why would children work in the first place? It was due to the fact that families were poor. They didn't have much of a choice, and they depended on their kids to make money to help pay the rent and buy